Imagine this. You wake up on a Monday morning, turn on the TV, and there's no NBA. No games, no practices, no contracts, no draft, nothing. The best players in the world stranded like someone had flipped a switch and shut the sport down overnight. LeBron, Kobe, Durant, Wade, all unemployed, training on their own, and full of questions. The reason? A cosmic mess between the team owners and the players' union that ended with the league locked up tight. Not a single dollar moved. It was as if the NBA had been hijacked by its own bosses, and in the meantime, some stars went looking for work in Europe, in China, in forgotten leagues across the world. Others just stayed home, not wanting to risk injury. But you know what's the craziest part? Many of them didn't even know when or if the NBA was coming back. And among those castaways, there was one Argentine, one who came back home to keep playing like nothing had happened. But not everyone was that lucky, because what happened during the last lockout was more than just a pause. It was a limbo, a strange experiment, and a warning that even the most powerful business can wobble. And now I'm going to tell you why. Let's get straight to the point. A lockout is when NBA owners say we've had enough and shut down the league like a bankrupt shop. They literally pull down the shutters, turn off the lights, and cut off every player's paycheck. Nobody gets paid, nobody trains, nobody signs contracts. It's like a strike, but reversed. It's not the players who walk out, it's the bosses. And that's exactly what happened in July 2011. After years of growth, massive contracts, and a league that looked like it was printing money, the owners suddenly claimed they were losing money. How? With packed arenas, multi-billion-dollar TV deals, and jerseys selling like hotcakes? Well, yes, but according to them, expenses were outpacing revenues and the inflated player contracts were to blame. So they demanded major changes. Stricter salary caps, shorter contracts, a smaller percentage for the players. Basically, they wanted a bigger slice of the pie. And the players' union, led by Derek Fisher and backed by stars like LeBron and Kobe, said,
"No.
No fucking way. Because while the owners were lining their pockets with TV rights and merchandise, the players were putting their bodies on the line every night. Sure, some made fortunes, but most had short careers, chronic injuries, and zero guarantees. The conflict escalated until the league shut down. On July 1st, the lockout officially began. No summer league, no preseason, no televised draft. The NBA went on pause, not because of a pandemic or a natural disaster, but because of a money mess. A fight between billionaires where the ones who suffered most were the players without the financial cushion to go months without a paycheck. Rookies, bench guys, players one injury away from falling out of the system. The atmosphere turned into this weird kind of limbo. Teams couldn't talk to their players, agents couldn't negotiate anything, and fans left hanging. No news, no games, no clarity. And that's when a parallel story began. Players looking for alternatives. Some went overseas, others kept training on their own, and many stars said, "No way I'm risking my future for a few bucks playing somewhere else." What happened during those months was one of the weirdest, most surreal chapters in modern basketball history, and you haven't seen anything yet. During those 5 months, players were left to fend for themselves. Some trained on their own, others organized exhibition games to stay in shape. And more than a few started to panic. No paycheck, no health insurance, and no idea if they'd ever have a job again. It felt like a sci-fi movie. The NBA was just a memory. Meanwhile, the league kept releasing cold, legal-sounding statements like a company in crisis. Nobody really knew anything for sure. And the craziest part, not even the players themselves were fully informed. Many were finding out about progress or setbacks in the negotiations through Twitter or watching SportsCenter like any other fan. The 2011 draft rookies were stuck in limbo. Imagine this, you get picked by an NBA team and instead of training with your new teammates, you go home to wait. No contract, no salary, no clear future. Players like Kyrie Irving and Kemba Walker had to debut months later in a completely different context than the one they'd prepared for. Even official presentations were delayed or canceled. Preseason games were scrapped. The October and November games were lost forever, and the league had to shrink the regular season from 82 games down to just 66 with a compressed schedule that forced teams to play in marathon mode. But beyond the basketball side of things, what people really felt was a sense of emptiness. Like the entire NBA ecosystem was floating in limbo, directionless, just waiting for someone to untangle the mess. Coaches weren't allowed to speak to their own players. Team doctors were forbidden from treating them. Players couldn't even use official training facilities. It was bureaucratic madness. And while some players tried to ride out the wave by training on their own, others started looking elsewhere. Europe, China, South America. Because if the NBA wasn't going to give you work, you had to go out and find it somewhere else. With the NBA shut down and no money coming in, a lot of players started looking at the map like they were basketball backpackers. Europe, China, Israel, Puerto Rico. Suddenly, leagues that were once considered second tier filled up with stars and role players all looking for the same thing, to keep playing and get paid. One of the first to make the jump was Durant Williams, who signed a multi-million-dollar deal with Besiktas in Turkey. Williams was at the top of his game, an all-star, and chose to play on the other side of the world while everything back home was still on hold. A risky move, sure, but also a statement. I'm not just going to sit around and wait. Another player who crossed continents was Tony Parker, who went back to France to play for Asvel, the club he partly owned. Nicolas Batum also joined the French league. It was a romantic return, but also a practical one. They played at home, stayed in game shape, and avoided getting rusty. China, meanwhile, became a magnet for guys looking for quick deals. Players like Wilson Chandler, J.R. Smith, and Kenyon Martin went to the Chinese league, got paid well, played for a few months, and returned to the NBA once the lockout ended. The crazy part? In China, contracts didn't allow for opt-out clauses, so many had to finish the full season over there regardless of when the NBA came back. That period was a wild ride. Total chaos. A world map with NBA players popping up in the most unexpected places. But if you think the biggest names, the superstars, the MVPs, also rushed out to find new destinations, you're forgetting one very important thing: the fear of injury. Because if one thing became clear during that exodus, it's that the best players on the planet weren't about to risk their future for a few extra bucks. While many role players were boarding flights to Istanbul, Shanghai, or Tel Aviv, the true NBA superstars stayed put, still unmoved, and not because they didn't have offers. On the contrary, they were flooded with multi-million-dollar deals from every corner of the globe. China, for example, threw out insane numbers just to have LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, or Kevin Durant in their league for even a few months. They wanted the photo, the show, the business. But the stars kept saying no over and over again because they understood something the rest of the world often forgets: their body is their career, and getting injured in a random game in a Ukrainian gym or getting stuck in a league with no health insurance could mean the end of everything. Kobe Bryant came close to signing with Virtus Bologna in Italy. The talks were advanced. There were rumors of $3 million contracts for just a month of play, but in the end, nothing. Neither Kobe nor his team were willing to take that step. The risk was just too high. LeBron James, on the other hand, used the lockout to train like a maniac. He locked in with his personal team to improve his body, his shot, and his mindset. He turned that dead time into a personal laboratory for reinvention. And it worked, because when the NBA came back, he exploded. That was the start of his path to his first ring. Same thing with Dwyane Wade, Carmelo Anthony, Chris Paul, Dwight Howard. All of them had offers on the table, and all of them gave the same answer: thanks, but I'll pass. Some did ad campaigns, others traveled, many organized charity events or exhibition games, but officially playing in another country? No way. There was one reason: avoid any injury that could jeopardize future contracts or entire careers. Because if you tore a knee in the Philippines or twisted an ankle in Serbia, the NBA wasn't going to wait for you, and it definitely wasn't going to pay you. And let's be clear, there was also a status thing. For many of the stars, playing in a lower league, even temporarily, meant stepping off the pedestal, showing vulnerability, exposing themselves. So while the role players scrambled to survive, the top guys stayed quiet, training in private gyms, posting videos online, or simply waiting for the system to reboot. It was a cold move, strategic, elite-level survival. But the question hung in the air: what if the NBA didn't come back? How long could they hold out? The tension kept building, and the pressure to reach a final deal was starting to blow. The players gave up a chunk of the league's revenue split. They went from receiving 57% of the total share to just 51%. Salary caps were tightened, stricter rules were put in place for long-term contracts, and new mechanisms were introduced to balance the power between small market and big market teams, though we all know how that ended. On their side, the owners agreed to give up some ground on free agency rules, player trade restrictions, and committed to improving conditions to keep talent more evenly distributed. But in practice, the system still favored the big franchises with endless wallets. On December 1st, the lockout was officially lifted and players were finally allowed to return to training, but the schedule was already wrecked. Everything was thrown together in a rush with no real preseason and a condensed 66-game calendar crammed into just 4.5 months. It was a brutal schedule. Teams were playing 3 games in 3 nights, players were physically drained, coaches had to improvise rotations to avoid injuries, and the league came back with a handbrake on. Christmas Day 2011 marked the official return. December 25th kicked off with a 5-game slate, including Knicks vs. Celtics at Madison Square Garden and a Miami Heat vs. Dallas Mavericks rematch of the previous finals. It was a strong comeback, explosive marketing, fireworks, and the full media machine in overdrive. But beneath the show, the wear and tear was obvious. Many players came back out of shape. Injuries exploded across the league: knees, ankles, hamstrings. The NBA was back, sure, but at a steep price. And the worst part? Some players never returned to their pre-lockout level. Guys who were just about to break out faded into obscurity. Others, heading into retirement, didn't even get the chance to say goodbye. And while the spotlight was on the stars, the ones who really suffered were the bench warmers, assistant coaches, and the franchise staff who were laid off during the shutdown. Because yes, while millions were flying back and forth in negotiations, a lot of the real workers in the NBA ecosystem were left out in the cold. The lockout ended. But it left scars, some invisible, others impossible to erase. And that brings us to the real question: what did all of this leave behind? What did the NBA learn, and what was lost forever? When people talk about the 2011 lockout, many remember it as just a simple pause in the NBA, an anecdote, a bump in the road. But if you lift the rug, you'll find a mountain of buried stories, careers that faded, dreams that never came true, and a very clear message. The NBA can be shut down at any moment if the money stops making sense for those at the top. Then you have the veteran players, guys who were 33, 34 years old and were hoping for one last contract. The lockout pushed them into retirement. Teams couldn't sign anyone, bodies couldn't train at the required pace, and when the league came back, that spot was already taken by someone younger or cheaper. Let's not forget the role players, the ones living day to day with no guaranteed contracts. Many ended up signing overseas in leagues that didn't pay on time or where they got injured without insurance, and when they tried to come back, no one called. It was a kind of silent purge, a cleanup no one wanted to acknowledge. But it happened. Even assistant coaches, player development staff, athletic trainers, and team personnel, they also lost their source of income for months. The NBA is a massive machine, and when it shuts down, it's not just the show that stops, it freezes an entire ecosystem. The 2011 lockout was a warning and alarm because it made one thing crystal clear. For the NBA, business always comes first, and if the numbers don't add up for the owners, they can shut it all down again. They've done it before, and they could do it again. So now the question is, was it all left in the past, or is there another ticking time bomb waiting? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. This was Hoop Secrets, and I'll see you next time.